People see the name, Steven Seagal, and they picture a man of action, a quiet storm of martial arts prowess, the unflappable hero who breaks wrists and saves the day without ever changing his expression. They see the legend, the larger-than-life persona crafted across dozens of films. They see the master, the guru, the man who walks with an almost mythical confidence. I see my father, and the truth of growing up in his shadow is far more complex, far more isolating, and far more shocking than any movie plot he ever starred in. My childhood wasn't a Hollywood dream. It was a gilded cage built on the foundations of a philosophy that left little room for a little girl. Our home wasn't a home in the traditional sense. It was a compound, a fortress. There were guards, not for the glamour of celebrity, but for the tangible sense of paranoia that seemed to permeate the very air we breathed. It was less about protecting us from the outside world and more about controlling the world within our walls. The scent I most associate with my childhood isn't baking cookies or fresh-cut grass. It's the heavy, cloying smell of sandalwood incense and expensive gun oil. The soundtrack wasn't laughter or cartoons, but the soft swish of silk robes, the sharp crack of a wooden bokken striking a practice dummy, and the low, meditative hum of my father's chanting. He wasn't just an actor playing a part. He was the part. The line between Steven Seagal, the movie star, and Steven Seagal, the father, was non-existent, because in his mind, both were merely extensions of his true self, the enlightened warrior. My life was governed by the principles of Aikido, not just in the dojo, but at the dinner table, in the classroom, in every interaction. There was no daddy's little girl. I was a disciple. I was an acolyte in a temple where the deity lived down the hall. Everything was a lesson. A scraped knee wasn't met with a hug and a bandage, but with a lecture on awareness and the importance of controlling one's physical space. A disagreement with a friend was an opportunity to discuss strategy, leverage, and the folly of emotional attachment. He was a man who saw the world as a constant series of threats and opportunities, and he was determined to raise a daughter who could navigate it with the same detached, strategic mindset. But a child needs a dad, not a sensei. I craved the simple, mundane things. A bedtime story not laden with Zen koans, a game of catch that wasn't a drill in hand-eye coordination and reflex training, a simple "I love you" that wasn't followed by a dissertation on the universal energy that connects all beings. The legend was always present, but the father was perpetually absent, lost within the myth he had so carefully constructed for himself and for the world. It was a lonely, silent world of profound privilege and even more profound emotional poverty. The daily rituals of our household were a study in surreal discipline. Breakfast wasn't a time for sleepy conversation. It was a silent, focused exercise in mindful consumption. My father would explain in his low, deliberate drawl the energetic properties of each food item, how the oatmeal would ground my chai, how the berries were a vessel for pure life force. To eat with anything less than total, meditative reverence was to disrespect the food, and by extension, the universe. I remember being 6 years old and being quizzed on the pressure points of an imaginary assailant while trying to eat my cereal. Failure to answer correctly would result in the bowl being taken away until I could demonstrate the proper focus. There were no playdates in the conventional sense. If another child was allowed into our fortress, it was not for fun, but for observation. He would watch us from a distance, his eyes unblinking, analyzing our movements, our interactions. He would later deconstruct the entire encounter with me. "Did you see how he left his flank exposed when he reached for the toy?" he'd ask. "A moment of inattention is a lifetime of regret." These weren't children to him. They were potential adversaries, case studies in human weakness. His world was binary. You were either a warrior or you were a victim. There was no in-between. Every walk around our property was a lesson in situational awareness. He would suddenly stop and quiz me. "How many birds are in that tree? What model is that car driving past the gate? What is the guard at post 2 doing right now?" He taught me to see everything. to notice details no one else did, to exist in a state of perpetual, low-level vigilance. While other kids were learning to ride bikes, I was learning how to escape from zip-tie restraints and how to use a ballpoint pen as a defensive weapon. He called it empowerment. As a child, it felt like terror. It taught me that the world was an inherently dangerous place, that threats lurked behind every corner, and that the only person you could ever truly rely on was yourself. It was a crushing weight for a young mind to bear. The house itself was a dojo. Furniture was sparse, arranged according to the principles of feng shui and tactical advantage. There were hidden panic rooms and fortified walls. It was a home designed not for comfort, but for defense. The quiet was the most unsettling part. There was no yelling, no overt anger. His displeasure was a silent, suffocating force. It was a tightening of the jaw, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a shift in the energy of the room so palpable you could taste it. It was a cold, controlled disapproval that was infinitely more terrifying than any shouting match could ever be. He wasn't raising a daughter, he was forging a weapon, and the fires of that forge were often cold and terrifyingly lonely. Growing up in the orbit of Hollywood royalty is strange enough, but my father's circle was a bizarre constellation of A-list action stars, legitimate martial arts masters, shadowy political figures, and self-proclaimed spiritual gurus. Our home was a revolving door for people who worshipped at the altar of Steven Seagal. They would hang on his every word, their eyes wide with reverence as he dispensed wisdom on everything from knife fighting to Buddhist philosophy. I learned to be invisible in these moments. I was a silent observer, a small ghost haunting the edges of these intense gatherings. To them, I was not a person, but an extension of him, a testament to his legacy. They would look at me with a strange mixture of pity and awe, as if I were some kind of rare, exotic creature living in captivity. The disconnect between the man they saw and the father I experienced was a chasm I could never cross. They saw a profound, enlightened teacher. I saw a man who struggled to make eye contact with his own daughter, who communicated in philosophical monologues instead of conversations. The parties were legendary, but not for their glamour. They were intense, male-dominated affairs fueled by ego and testosterone. I would see famous actors, men the world adored as heroes, listen with rapt attention as my father explained the true nature of combat, often demonstrating techniques on them with a force that was just a little too real, leaving them wincing but smiling, desperate for his approval. It was a court, and he was its undisputed king. This environment warped my perception of reality. I had no baseline for what was normal. I thought it was normal for your father's friends to include former CIA operatives and Tibetan monks. I thought it was normal for dinner conversation to veer from movie deals to the intricacies of covert surveillance. This world also exposed me to the darker side of fame. I heard the whispers, the rumors that followed him everywhere, the stories about his on-set behavior, the allegations from women, the tales of his explosive temper. At home, he was a controlled, almost unnervingly calm presence. But I knew, with the intuition a child has, that a volcano of something far more volatile simmered just beneath that placid surface. I learned to navigate his moods, to read the subtle shifts in his energy, to know when to speak and when to disappear. It was another survival skill, perhaps the most important one he ever taught me. Living as the daughter of a Hollywood legend wasn't about red carpets and movie premieres. It was about surviving in the shadow of a self-made myth, a man who demanded the world conform to his reality and who treated his own family as supporting characters in the epic film of his own life. The most shocking truth about growing up with my father wasn't the paranoia or the bizarre training. It was the profound and absolute absence of emotional intimacy. He had built a fortress around himself so impenetrable that I don't believe even he knew how to lower the drawbridge. He viewed emotions, fear, sadness, even exuberant joy, as weaknesses, as vulnerabilities to be disciplined out of existence. They were distractions on the path to enlightenment, static in the clear channel of the warrior's mind. I remember one time, when I was about 9, my pet dog, a golden retriever I had loved dearly, passed away. I was inconsolable, my world shattered in the way only a child's can be. I cried for hours, a deep, gut-wrenching grief. My father found me in my room, my face buried in my pillow. He didn't hug me. He didn't offer a single word of comfort. He sat on the edge of my bed, his presence filling the room with a heavy silence. After a long moment, he spoke. His voice the same calm, measured tone he used for everything. "Attachment is the root of all suffering," he said. "You are not crying for the dog. The dog's spirit is free. You are crying for yourself. You are indulging in your own ego's pain. To be strong, you must transcend this. Observe the feeling. Do not become it." He then stood up and left the room, leaving me alone with my grief and a profound sense of shame. I had not just lost my dog, I had failed a test. My natural human reaction was a flaw in my character. From that day on, I learned to cry in secret. I learned to swallow my sadness, to mask my fear, to present a stoic, untroubled face to him, because I knew that was the only version of me he would respect. We never had a real conversation. Our interactions were lectures, Socratic dialogues where he already had all the answers. I would ask a question about school, and he would steer it into a lesson about strategy. I would talk about a friend, and he would deconstruct their motivations and weaknesses. He was incapable of just listening, of just being a father. He had to be the sensei, the guru, the master. He was always teaching, always performing. There was no vulnerability, no admission of doubt, no, "I don't know." He was a human fortress, and there were no visitors allowed inside the walls. This emotional void left me feeling profoundly alone. I was surrounded by wealth, by staff, by the constant hum of activity that surrounds AES, TAR, yet I was an island. I looked for paternal warmth in other places, in teachers, in my friends' fathers, craving the simple, unconditional affection that was so absent in my own home. The man who was a hero to millions was a stranger to his own daughter, a figure I respected and feared in equal measure, but one I never truly felt loved by in the way a child needs to be loved. He gave me skills to survive a physical fight, but he left me utterly unprepared to navigate the complexities of the human heart. The breaking point came not with a bang, but with a quiet, soul-crushing realization. I was 17, watching a movie with a friend at her house. It was a simple family comedy, and in one scene, the father, a bumbling, ordinary man, simply sat with his daughter and listened to her talk about her bad day, ending with a warm, comforting hug. I started to cry. Not just a few tears, but a deep, heaving sob that came from a place I had kept locked away for years. My friend was bewildered, asking what was wrong, and I couldn't explain it. How could I explain that I was weeping for a hug? That the simple, unremarkable act of parental affection on a movie screen felt as foreign and unattainable to me as a trip to the moon? In that moment, I understood that I was starving. I had been fed a diet of philosophy, discipline, and esoteric wisdom, but I was starving for basic human connection. I realized that if I stayed, I would disappear completely. I would either become the perfect emotionless warrior he wanted, a hollow shell of a person, or I would break under the strain of pretending. The escape had to be as strategic as any lesson he had ever taught me. A dramatic confrontation would have been useless. It would only be seen as an emotional outburst, a failure on my part. I had to play the long game. I enrolled in a university hundreds of miles away, framing it as a strategic move to gain a broader understanding of the world, language he could understand and respect. The day I left, he didn't hug me goodbye. He placed a hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eye, and said, "Remember your training. Trust no one. Be the predator, not the prey." It was the only blessing he knew how to give. College was a revelation. It was a chaotic, messy, beautifully normal world. I saw people express their feelings openly. I saw families who laughed and argued and hugged. It was like learning a new language. For the first year, I was a ghost, an observer, just as I had been at my father's parties. I was still operating on his principles: watch, analyze, assess threats. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to let my guard down. I made friends who found my hyper-awareness strange but endearing. I had to consciously unlearn a lifetime of programming. I had to teach myself that it was okay to be sad, that it was okay to be vulnerable, that it was okay to not have all the answers. I had to find the little girl who had been buried under years of warrior training and tell her it was safe to come out. It was the hardest fight of my life, a battle fought not in a dojo, but in the quiet of my own heart, against the ghost of my father's teachings that echoed in my head. Years have passed since I began my journey away from his shadow. I have built a life for myself, a quiet, simple life that he would likely view as a failure. I have a job that I love, a small circle of friends who I trust implicitly, and a home that is filled with warmth, laughter, and a healthy amount of clutter. It is not a fortress, it is a sanctuary. For a long time I was consumed by anger and resentment. I blamed him for the emotional scars, for the years of loneliness, for the gaping hole in my childhood where a father should have been. I saw him as a narcissist, a man so enamored with his own myth that he was incapable of seeing the real people around him. But with time and therapy, my perspective has shifted. I no longer see him as a monster, but as a deeply complex and in many ways tragic figure. He is a man who was also a product of his own difficult upbringing, who found salvation and identity in the rigid discipline of martial arts. He built his persona as a suit of armor to protect himself from the world, and somewhere along the way, he forgot how to take it off. He gave me the tools he thought I would need to survive in the world he saw, a cold, dangerous place. He taught me discipline, focus, and a resilience I wouldn't trade for anything. In his own strange, misguided way, I believe he thought he was doing what was best. Our relationship today is distant, but it is not filled with hate. We speak occasionally, our conversations still stilted and superficial. He talks of his latest projects, his spiritual insights. I talk of my work, my garden. We are like two ambassadors from different countries, speaking different languages, trying to find some sliver of common ground. I have learned to take the good from what he gave me, the strength, the awareness, and discard the rest. I have learned that forgiveness is not about absolving him. It is about freeing myself. It is about acknowledging the truth of my past without letting it define my future. The shocking truth about growing up with Steven Seagal isn't just about the bizarre training or the emotional neglect. It's that you can survive a childhood devoid of warmth and still learn how to create it for yourself. It's that the most important lessons aren't about how to fight an enemy, but about how to embrace your own vulnerability, how to heal your own wounds, and how to finally learn to give and receive the simple, uncomplicated hug you always deserved. I am no longer just the legend's daughter. I am my own person, and my greatest victory was not in mastering any martial art, but in mastering the art of being human.